Good morning, everyone. Welcoming you all to our Sunday CME. Today we have our Consultant General Surgeon, Dr. Atul Kumar Mathur, who is speaking on the topic blunt injury of abdomen. Going back to Sir's academic background, Sir graduated from Neil Ratan Sir Medical College, Kolkata, and did his MS also. Later, Sir has worked in Steel Authority of India for 7 years and in Indian Oil Corporation in Madurai and prestigious hospitals in the National Capital Region. Sir has worked for the government of Mozambique in Africa in a large provincial hospital, and Sir has joined with the Ahalya Group in 2008 and has been with us for about 13 years. Sir has a rich 30 years post PG experience and special interest in abdominal trauma, which is very common in Africa and industrial regions. Welcome you, sir, for presenting the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Good morning. Good morning, my colleagues and doctors. The topic for discussion today is management of blunt abdominal trauma. Now, it is quite a common feature in the developing countries and in rural settings, as well as in developed countries. Now, as an introduction, abdominal trauma is an injury to the abdomen, and it is divided into two parts broadly: the penetrating abdominal trauma and the blunt abdominal trauma. The penetrating abdominal trauma is usually based on clinical signs. You can see the region from where the penetration and the puncture wound you can see. Blunt abdominal trauma is more likely to be delayed diagnosis or altogether missed diagnosis because clinical signs are less obvious in blunt abdominal trauma. Blunt injuries predominate mostly in rural areas broadly, while penetrating ones are more frequent in urban settings. This is because in rural areas you see people going on open vehicles and in tractors and they fall down, rupture the malarial spleen, and they result in massive hemoperitoneum, among other things. So, and in penetrating injuries are more common in urban settings in general. Now, motor vehicle accidents are responsible for 75% of all blunt trauma abdominal injuries. They are more common in elderly due to less resilience. Blunt injuries causes solid organ trauma such as spleen, liver and kidneys more than hollow viscera. And multi-organ injury and multiple system injury are also more common in blunt injury than in other types. So motor vehicle accidents are responsible for most of the injuries, blunt injuries, and they're more common in elderlies, and solid organs are traumatized more frequently, such as the spleen, liver, and kidneys. And multi-organ injury and multiple system injuries are more common in blunt injury. Now, there are four basic mechanisms by which the blunt injury occurs: crushing, shearing, bursting, and penetration. Crushing injury is a direct application of a blunt force to the abdomen. For example, when a heavy masonry or some heavy weight falls directly on the abdomen, that can cause the abdomen to crush between the floor and the heavy object. Shearing means sudden decelerations which apply a shearing force across organs with fixed attachments. This is typical when a wheel or a tire of a vehicle passes over the abdomen. There is shearing force resulting in severe abdominal injury. The third one is bursting type of blunt injury, in which there is a raised intraluminal pressure by the abdominal compression, resulting in hollow organs rupturing because of the pressure. Fourth is the penetration. It is also possible in blunt injuries because of disruption of bony areas by blunt trauma, which may generate bony spicules that can cause secondary penetrating injuries. This is very typical in pelvic fracture, where one of the pelvic bones, they form a spicule and penetrate and damage the pelvic organs, such as the bladder typically. Now, before going on to the blunt abdominal injury, I want to outline the abdominal areas. They're called quadrants, which would imply four, but actually there are 9 areas: the right hypochondriac region, the epigastric region, the left hypochondric region, the right lumbar region, the umbilical, the left lumbar region, the right iliac region, hypogastric region, and the right and the left iliac region. So these are the 9 broad areas for the sake of convenience. Now, when we see abdominal trauma, we have to picture in our minds which are the organs which are likely to have been injured. For example, when we see injury to the right hypochondric region, we must immediately think about the liver, the gallbladder, the small intestine, the ascending and the transverse colon, the right kidney. All these are may be injured in right hypochondric region injury. For epigastric injuries, epigastric blunt injury, the organs which might be damaged are the esophagus, stomach, liver, pancreas, small intestine, and transverse colon, the right and left adrenal glands, the pancreas, and the kidneys, right and left. And in some regions, in some cases, the spleen also. Now, in left hypochondriac region injuries, the organs which are likely to be damaged is the stomach, the liver tip, the pancreas, tail, the intestine, small intestine, transverse colon, and the descending colon. The pancreas and the left kidney, and one of the more important organs which can be damaged, which may be fatal, is the spleen. We have to think of the spleen when we are thinking of left hypochondrium injuries. The right lumbar region, if there is a blunt trauma, we have to think of the liver tip, the gallbladder again, the small intestine, the ascending colon, the right kidney. In the umbilical region, stomach, pancreas, small intestine, the transverse colon, the pancreas, right and left kidneys, and the ureter, the cisterna chyli. In the left lumbar region, the small intestine, the descending colon, the left kidney. These are the organs which might be damaged. Now, in the right iliac region, if there's blunt injury, actually we cannot compartmentalize the injury. Normally, it's a blunt injury means the whole abdomen is affected, but this is a broad way of looking at it. Now, the left iliac injury, abdominal blunt injury might cause damage to the small intestine, the appendix, the cecum, and the ascending colon, the right ovaries, and the right fallopian tube. Hypogastrium, the intestine, small intestine, the sigmoid colon, the rectum, the right and left ovaries, the right and left ureter, the bladder, urinary bladder, and in males, the vas deferens, seminal vesicle, and the prostate. Left iliac region, the small intestine, descending colon, sigmoid colon, and the left ovary and left fallopian tube. These are the organs in general which might be damaged. Now, before going to blunt abdominal injury, let us look at the anatomical features of the abdominal wall. Below the skin lies the camper fatty layer, the Camper's fascia, and the superficial fascia, the Scarpa's fascia, fascia Scarpa and camper. Then there's the external oblique, internal oblique, transversus abdominis muscles, and the fascia transversalis. After that, there's the parietal peritoneum with the extraperitoneal space. The same thing if we look in the transverse section, we can see the skin, the Scarpa and camper fascia, the 3 oblique muscles, external oblique, internal oblique, and the transversus abdominis. And then the parietal peritoneum, the transversalis abdominal, the parietal peritoneum. These are the layers of the abdomen. Now, laterally, if we see, it's basically the same, the skin with the camper and Scarpa's fascia. The camper is the soft and spongy fatty layer, and the Scarpa is the membranous layer. And the external oblique, by the time it reaches the lateral type part, it becomes aponeurosis, external oblique, internal oblique, transversus abdominis, fascia transversalis, extraperitoneal fat, and the peritoneum. These are the layers laterally. The peritoneum, we will go into a brief description because it's very important and it is affected in all blunt injury cases which are clinically significant. It's a double layer serous membrane. Basically, there are two parts, the parietal layer and the visceral layer. The parietal layer, it lines the abdominopelvic wall and folds back on itself, forming a double membrane called the mesentery. The function of the mesentery is it provides support to the intestine as the mesentery and mesocolon. In the case of stomach, it is called the omentum. In the liver, it's called the falciform ligament. It prevents intestinal twisting, stores fat, and it's a pathway for vessels and nerves to go and supply the gut. The visceral peritoneum, it covers the organs very closely. Most cases, it cannot be separated from the organ. The peritoneal cavity is a potential space containing a bit of the serous fluid normally, but in some cases it can contain blood, it can contain exudate, transudate, pus, bile, whatever. So this is a potential cavity. Normally it contains a small amount of serous fluid. Now these are the organs, the relative positions. Very roughly, we can see starting from the right iliac fossa, we can see the end of the ileum, the appendix, the cecum, ileocecal junction, the ascending colon, the right colic flexure, gallbladder, the duodenum, and the pyloric part of the stomach, the liver, which is very commonly injured in blunt abdomen injury. Then there's the esophagus, the fundus of the stomach. Left side is the spleen, that is another very common organ which is injured. Then the left colic flexure, the jejunum, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum anal canal. So these are the relative positions of the organs, which is necessary to bear in mind when we are considering blunt abdominal injury, to see which part may be involved in that injury. Now, the presentation of a blunt abdominal injury, it varies widely from hemodynamic stability with minimal abdominal signs to complete cardiovascular collapse, and may change from one to the other with alarming rapidity. A patient may come very stable, suddenly he can collapse, and within hours he can be dead. Now, injuries are often categorized by type of structure that is damaged. If only the abdominal wall is damaged, solid organ such as the liver, spleen, pancreas, and kidneys are damaged. Hollow viscous, stomach, small intestine, colon, ureter, and bladder, or the vasculature. Now, damage to the vasculature is important because not only will it give rise to blood loss, it can also involve the segment that is being supplied by that vasculature. So if the mesenteric artery or the mesenteric vein is involved, then that part of the gut is devascularized. So it is a double danger. Now, spleen is the most common cause of massive bleeding in blunt abdominal trauma to a solid organ. Spleen is the most commonly injured. Hello? The spleen is the second most commonly injured intra-abdominal organ in children. A laceration of the spleen may be associated with a hematoma. Because of the spleen's ability to bleed profusely, a ruptured spleen can be life-threatening, resulting in shock. Now, what is more important in spleen is that initially the patient might come with very less systemic disturbance because it's a subcapsular hematoma. But that subcapsular hematoma might rupture later. Suddenly there's massive bleeding and the patient is in shock in no time. So we have to be very careful when we are dealing with splenic injury. Now, the patients with intra-abdominal injury following blunt abdominal trauma, this is a pie diagram showing the most common injuries. The splenic injury is 40% in all serious patients. Liver injury is 33%. Then there's a renal injury and the intestinal injury, which is 7% only. So this is approximately the breakup of the injuries of the abdomen. Now, the solid organ injuries, they are more commonly involved in blunt trauma in decreasing incidence of injury. First is spleen, then liver, then kidney, intraperitoneal small bowel, bladder, colon, diaphragm, pancreas, and duodenum. This is the approximate order of occurrence. Now, the hollow viscera, the duodenum is commonly injured, and the small bowel injured at relatively fixed areas, such as the duodeno-jejunal junction and ileocecal junction, which are fixed. and hence they are more prone to shearing force. The colon is relatively protected by reason of much of it being retroperitoneal. Gaseous distension of cecum is most vulnerable as it is fixed, and also the pressure in rupture can occur. The stomach is rarely injured because compression will cause esophageal junction to give way, so that there is no real injury to the stomach in general. Retroperitoneum and urogenital tract. The kidney injury is common next to spleen and the liver. Pancreatic injury is 4% of the trauma. Bladder is most commonly injured extraperitoneally by shearing at the vesico-urethral junction, and intraperitoneally by blunt force on a distended bladder. So when the bladder is distended, it's intraperitoneal rupture. Rupture of the prostatic urethra by shear forces is commonly seen with hemorrhage. So we have to be careful when dealing with the nature of the injuries. Now, when the patient of blunt injury comes, the initial assessment is very important to determine if the patient is hemodynamically stable. We have to see whether the patient is stable, use a systematic approach based on ABCDE to assess and treat an acutely injured patient. Unless there are associated injuries, most patients with abdominal trauma generally present with a patent airway. Alterations found in breathing, circulation, and disability assessments generally correspond to the degree of shock. The goal is to manage any immediate threat to life and identify any emergent concerns that may require activation of retrieval services and early transfer. So, what is important here is to rule out associated injuries and the airway and the bleeding. Now, the primary survey, the airway, we assess for the airway stability, attempt to elicit a response from the patient, look for signs of airway obstruction, use of accessory muscles, ALNSI and sternocleidomastoid, paradoxic chest movements, and seesaw respirations. Listen for any upper airway noises, breath sounds. Are they absent, diminished, or noisy? Noisy ventilations indicate a partial airway obstruction by either the tongue or foreign material. So that has to be taken care of. Hemorrhage and vomiting are common causes of airway obstruction in trauma patients. These should be removed immediately with suction. So if there is a noisy respiration, we have to think of hemorrhage or vomiting inside the airway. That should be taken care of. Now, going further in airways, a simple airway maneuver we should attempt if required. Open the airway using the chin lift and jaw thrust. Suction of the airway if excessive secretions are noted or if the patient is unable to clear the airway independently. And insert an oropharyngeal airway if required. If the airway is obstructed, simple airway opening maneuver should be performed as described above. Care should be taken not to extend the cervical spine because there might be some spinal injury also. NPA should not be inserted in patients with a head injury in whom the base of the skull fracture has not been excluded. Now, before coming to the blunt injury management, we are looking at a patient when he arrives in the casualty to assess the patient primarily. Airway continued. Secure the airway if necessary. Treat airway obstruction as a medical emergency. Consider intubation early if there is any sign of decreased level of consciousness, if the Glasgow coma scale is less than 9, unprotected airway, uncooperative or combative patient leading to distress and further risk of injury. Hypoventilation, hypoxia, or a pending airway obstruction, stridor or hoarse voice. And assist ventilation with the bag and mask while the provider is setting up for intubation. So you should not waste time. While the intubation is being prepared, you should assist the ventilation with a bag and a mask. Maintain full spinal precautions in all cases where the spinal injury is suspected. In polytrauma patients, especially where there is altered layer of consciousness, ensure cervical collar, head blocks, or inline immobilization is maintained throughout the patient care. Now, breathing part, the patients with early compensated shock may have a mild increase in their respiration rate. However, Those with more severe hypovolemic shock will display marked tachypnea. First, you should assess the chest, count the patient respiration rate, and note the depth and adequacy of the bleeding. Auscultate the chest for breath sounds and assess for any wheeze, stridor, or decreased air entry. Be mindful that in the setting of abdominal trauma, potential thoracic injuries may have occurred also. We should not think only of blunt injury of the abdomen, the other injury, polytrauma, might be possible. The rupture of the hemidiaphragm often leads to compromise in respiratory function, and bowel sounds can be heard over the thorax when breath sounds are auscultated. So when you hear for the breath sound, you hear bowel sounds, the rupture of the hemidiaphragm is a possibility. Record the oxygen saturation SpO2. Adequate oxygenation to the brain is an essential element in avoiding secondary brain injury. Monitor the SpO2 and maintain it above 95%. Failure to keep saturations above this rate is associated with poorer outcomes. Ensure high flow oxygen is administered to maintain saturations above 95%. Primary survey, the circulation part. Assess the circulation and perfusion. Check for the heart rate, the blood pressure, and the peripheral circulation, and the skin, if it is pale, cool, or clammy. Circulation. Shock from intra-abdominal hemorrhage may range from mild tachycardia with few other findings to severe tachycardia, marked hypotension, and pale, cool, clammy skin. The most reliable indicator for intra-abdominal hemorrhage is the presence of hypovolemic shock from an unexplained source. So when you see intra-abdominal hemorrhage, when you hear of hypovolemic shock unexplained, you should think of intra-abdominal hemorrhage. In immediate trauma care, aim for a blood pressure greater than 90 systolic or a shock index less than 1, which is the heart rate divided by the systolic blood pressure. It should be less than 1. Now, as an initial measure, you should insert 2 large bore peripheral IV cannulas. If SS is difficult, consider a central or an intraosseous insertion if the equipment and the skills are available. Now in Ahalya, since we have got a very good anesthesia department, I'm sure these facilities, the central venous approach is possible. In fact, it is desirable in these cases. So no problem regarding the skills here. Primary survey, the circulation again, commence fluid resuscitation as indicated. Initial treatment of hypovolemia with crystalloid fluids, normal saline, is recommended up to 20 to 30 ml per kg. Blood pressure goals for penetrating trauma or uncontrollable hemorrhage are generally lower. So the blood pressure goals are lower for penetrating trauma and uncontrollable hemorrhage than for blunt trauma in the absence of major head injury. Systolic blood pressure values less than 90 may be acceptable if cerebral perfusion is maintained and the conscious state is normal. Early consultation about such patients is required. Now, primary survey, the disability part. Assess the level of consciousness. Now, this is A, B, C, D. D is disability. Assess the level of consciousness. Perform an initial Glasgow Coma Scale, best eye-opening motor response and verbalization. Check the pupil size and reaction if conscious state is altered, and test blood sugar levels. Ensure that any alterations in level of consciousness are not related to metabolic cause, which means that you might think that there is alteration due to in consciousness due to blunt injury trauma, but actually maybe it is due to the low blood sugar level. So to avoid that, you should have these tests done. Now, E, exposure. By the end of the primary survey, the patient should have been fully exposed so as to ensure no injuries posing an immediate threat to life are missed. Consideration must be given to the patient's age, gender, and culture when exposing them for trauma examination. Exposure may need to be done sequentially, uncovering one body region at a time to maintain the dignity of the patient. So expose the patient one region at a time. in the presence of a chaperone. The trauma patients are prone to hypothermia, so upon completion of the primary survey, they should be covered with dry, warm blanket, and external warming devices may be required if the patient is even mildly hypothermic. All intravenous fluid and blood should be warmed prior to administration if a fluid warmer is available, which in our case it is. I know it as a fact. The second priorities are history. Now, once you have done with the examination, the initial survey of the patient, go for the history. To know injury mechanism, the mode of injury, to anticipate the injury patterns and raise the index of suspicion for occult injury. Events preceding the injury, the general principles are serial examination by the same examiner improves the sensitivity. Instead of several people examining different times, the same examiner should examine serially. Spinal cord injury masks the clinical signs and tenderness is blunted by intoxicants. So the patient who is intoxicated might not respond to evaluation of tenderness. Spinal cord injury may mask clinical findings, and we should know the history of the mechanism of injury either from the patient himself or herself or from witnesses or relatives. On the physical examination, the general examination relating to hemodynamic stability of abdominal findings. For inspection, look for abdominal distension, which might signify either ileus or hemoperitoneum. Look for contusions and abrasions, which is very important. Look for belt ecchymosis. Mesenteric, bowel, and lumbar spine injuries might be involved in seat belt ecchymosis. And periumbilical Cullen's sign and flank discoloration, Gray Turner sign ecchymosis, are suggestive of retroperitoneal hematoma. So if you see the Cullen's sign and the Gray Turner sign, it would signify retroperitoneal hematoma. It is now this is the classical seat belt sign. The bruising on the left breast is from the shoulder belt, and the low bruising to the abdominal belt is from the lap belt. So usually two bruises are seen. One is from the shoulder and another from the lap belt. Now this is the Cullen's sign and the Gray Turner sign. Discoloration around the umbilicus is the Cullen's sign, and the Gray Turner sign is the discoloration around the flank. More easily seen naturally in fair-skinned patients, and the significance is that it shows bleeding inside. Now, after inspection, we go for palpation for tenderness, guarding, rigidity, rebound tenderness. All might signify hemoperitoneum or rupture of the gut. Tenderness, guarding, rigidity, rebound tenderness. Percussion, we see dullness or shifting dullness, which again shows intra-abdominal collection. We all know what shifting dullness is. The significance is that it can cause collection, it can signify collection inside the peritoneal cavity. In case of blunt injury abdomen, it is suggestive of blood collection in the intra-abdominal cavity. Auscultation, the presence and absence of bowel sounds. Absence of bowel sounds may be due to peritonitis setting due to perforation of the gut and also due to paralytic ileus due to spinal injury. Now the rectal finding, check for gross blood, pelvic fracture, determine the prostate position. High riding prostate will signify urethral injury, and assess the sphincter tone. Sphincter tone, if lacks sphincter tone, would signify spinal injury, neurologic status. The distal pulses are also significant. Look for absence of distal pulse or asymmetry, and assessment of other associated injuries such as multiple fractures, spinal injuries, etc. Now, after we have finished examining the patient, we go for diagnostic strategy to identify those with injuries, to decide which ones need laparotomies, and to decide how fast this should be done. So there are three main arms. The first is to identify those who are injured at all. Second is how serious is the injury. do they need laparotomy or no? And the third one is how fast they need laparotomy. Not only do they need, but how fast they need laparotomy. Now for that, there are baseline investigations, the 4-quadrant TAP, the diagnostic peritoneal lavage, the ultrasound fast, focused assessment with sonography for trauma. Then there is abdominal CT scan, diagnostic laparoscopy, and laparotomy. Laparotomy is the final court of appeal, which means that when everything else fails, it's better to open and see than to wait and see. This is a schematic diagram for a blunt injury abdomen. Blunt injury abdomen, you should go for FAST. FAST, like we said, was focus assessment of with sonography for trauma. It can be positive, it can be negative, or it can be equivocal. If it is positive, the patient is unstable, take him to the OT operation room. If the fast is positive, the patient is stable, go for CT scan. Hello? Right. After fast, if it is negative, the patient is unstable, there are no risk factors, go for serial examinations. If the fast is negative, the patient is stable, but risk factors are there, go for CT. If the fast is negative, but patient is unstable, go for repeat fast or for diagnostic peritoneal lavage. If it is equivocal, of course, if it is stable, go for CT. If it is unstable, go for DPL. Now, baseline investigations are hemogram with hematocrit, the acid-base gas, the electrocardiogram, the renal function test, and urinalysis. Urinalysis is, if it is present for hematuria, it will signify genitourinary injury. If it is negative, it doesn't mean anything. Negative is not important. Now, serum amylase, lipase, and liver enzymes, increase of which are suspicious of intra-abdominal injuries. Now go for chest radiograph, pneumothorax or hemothorax, which can be associated with blunt injury. Raised left or right hemidiaphragm. Raised left hemidiaphragm would signify perisplenic hematoma, and right hemidiaphragm would show hepatic hematoma, perihepatic. Lower rib fracture, liver, spleen injury. Abdominal contents in the chest, ruptured hemidiaphragm. Now, if you see the chest diaphragm with some organs of the abdomen, it would signify that the diaphragm has ruptured and abdominal contents have come up. Now, abdominal radiographs, pneumoperitoneum is suggestive of perforation of hollow viscus, ground glass appearance suggestive of massive hemoperitoneum, dilated gut loops in retroperitoneal hematoma or injury, retroperitoneal air outlining the right kidney in duodenal injury. The double wall sign, the air inside and outside the bowel, would show pneumoperitoneum, and distortion or enlargement of outlines of viscera, hematoma, retroperitoneal organs. Now, abdominal radiograph continued. Medial displacement of the stomach is suggestive of splenic hematoma, obliteration of Schwartz shadow, retroperitoneal bleeding, pelvic bone fracture, bladder, urethral rectal injury, and fracture of the vertebra, ureter injury, and retroperitoneal hematoma. So, for example, if you see medial displacement of the stomach with fracture of the lower 3 or 4 left ribs, then you should think of splenic hematoma. Indications for further testing is unexplained hemorrhagic shock. Any hemorrhagic shock which cannot be explained with the present data should prompt further testing. Major chest or pelvic injuries, abdominal tenderness, diminished pain response due to intoxication, due to depressed level of consciousness, due to distracting pain or paralysis. All this can means that you have to go for further testing, and inability to perform serial examination for whatever reason. Now, one of the more important methods is the 4-quadrant tap. 4-quadrant tap means you put a wide bore needle through the right upper, the right lower, the left upper, and left lower quadrant, and you try to draw blood. The overall accuracy is 90%. The positive tap is obtaining 0.1 ml or more of non-clotting blood Negative type does not rule out hemorrhage. So if you obtain 0.1 ml of non-clotting blood, that is significant, and negative type does not rule out hemorrhage. Now, second thing is diagnostic peritoneal lavage. It's a criteria for positive TAP. Gross bloody TAP with more than 100,000 RBCs per ml, 500 WC per mm, or elevated amylase or presence of bile. All this is significant. Now, diagnostic peritoneal lavage is a closed percutaneous technique using controlled pressure. Insert the catheter and stilate perpendicular to the skin along the anesthetized track using a twisting motion in the subumbilical region. So we pierce the linea alba peritoneum, the omentum, and enter the peritoneal cavity. You put in 1000 ml of normal saline, and then let it stay for some time and let it flow out through the same cannula, and then examine it. So in rural settings or places where specialized diagnostic facilities are not available, this is invaluable. I worked in places where we didn't have CT, or even the ultrasound was not very readily available in Africa. So this is an excellent way of dealing with diagnosis of peritoneal lavage, just short of laparotomy. Now, ultrasound fast examinations, focused assessment with ultrasound for trauma. The advantage of fast is it's inexpensive, non-invasive, and portable. It is performed by emergency physicians and surgeons trained in performing fast examination. It avoids the risk associated with contrast media and confirms the presence of hemoperitoneum in minutes. Decreased time to laparotomy and great adjunct during multiple casualty disaster. If there are multiple casualty, you can easily go diagnose and proceed with this. Serial examinations can detect ongoing hemorrhage, differentiates pulseless electrical activity from extreme hypotension, and with pregnant trauma patient determines gestational age and fetal viability. Diagnostic peritoneal TAP might not be very ideal for pregnant patients or with obese patients or with those with surgical emphysema. Now, disadvantage of fast is a return of 70 ml of intraperitoneal fluid for positive study. Accuracy is dependent on operator-interpreter skill, and it decreases with prior abdominal surgery. Technically difficult with obese, ileus, or subcutaneous emphysema patients, and does not define exact cause of hemoperitoneum. Sensitivity is low for bowel or pancreatic injuries. Sensitivity is around 70 to 100%, and specificity is around 86%. Now, the technique is 4 basic transducer positions used to find abdominal fluid: the subxiphoid for hemopericardium, right upper quadrant Morrison's pouch, left upper quadrant fluid in the perisplenic space, and suprapubic for fluid in pouch of Douglas. Now, this is a rough schematic figure. Abdominal CT scan is the latest generation of helical and multi-slice scanners, provides rapid and accurate diagnostic information. The criteria standard for solid organ injuries and help quantitate the amount of blood in the abdomen and can reveal individual organs with precision. So this is the most accurate method, although it's more expensive. Here is an assessment of the diagnostic modalities in abdominal trauma: peritoneal lavage, ultrasound, and CT scan. The use, contraindications, and drawback. Now, the use of peritoneal lavage is that it records intra-abdominal hemorrhage in stable and unstable trauma. The contraindications are the urgent demand for laparotomy. If the laparotomy is urgently needed, you would not like to go for peritoneal lavage. The prior abdominal surgery, if it is there, then it is not advisable because of the adhesions inside the abdomen, previous surgery. And also pregnancy and obesity, you should not use the peritoneal lavage method. The drawback is unreliable in retroperitoneal and diaphragmatic trauma. Ultrasound, the use is reveals intra-abdominal hemorrhage in stable and unstable patients. The contraindication is that if urgent demand for laparotomy again, if the laparotomy is urgently demanded, you would not go for ultrasound, you would rush to the operation table. And obesity and subcutaneous emphysema also relatively precludes ultrasound. The drawback is fails to show small amount of fluid. CT scan, the use is reveals organ of injury and extent of blunt penetrating abdominal trauma in stable patients. Contraindication is that need for emergency laparotomy in an unstable patient. Again, the same thing. If the patient is unstable and needs surgery, he needs surgery. You should not go for other modalities. Uncooperative patients, not possible to do CT scan and allergy to contrast material. The drawback of CT scan is unreliable in detection of rupture of bowel and diaphragmatic injuries. It's time consuming and the high cost, which is not feasible in poor setups. Now, diagnostic modalities in abdominal trauma, peritoneal lavage, the sensitivity is 100%, specificity is 97%, accuracy is 99%. Ultrasound sensitivity 84, specificity 88, accuracy is 86. So all of these are very reliable methods. It's just a matter of individual preference. Sensitivity in CT scan is 89, specificity is 98, and accuracy is 97. Now, laparoscopy, the advantages are it's just short of laparotomy. Laparoscopy is the most reliable method because you can actually see what's happening inside. The extent of organ injuries and determines the need for laparotomy, defines which intra-abdominal injuries may be safely managed non-surgically, and it is more sensitive than either DPL or CT scan in uncovering diaphragmatic injuries and hollow viscous injuries. And surgery can be done in the same setting with laparoscope with minimal trauma, or you can go for the open surgery. So laparoscopy is, you can actually see what's happening. So it is much more reliable than anything else, just short of a laparotomy. The disadvantages is that the pneumoperitoneum, which needs to be created 10 to 12 mm mercury, that may elevate the intracranial pressure. The general anesthesia is usually necessary for laparoscopy, and the patient must be hemodynamically stable. The complications is bleeding or injury due to that procedure and gas embolism and pneumoperitoneum. So it is not foolproof, but it is reliable. Now, laparotomy is the final court of appeal. The indications: peritonitis, when you can detect gross blood, bile or feces. Pneumoperitoneum or pneumoretroperitoneum is there, then go for it. Evidence of diaphragmatic defect, gross blood from stomach or rectum, and abdominal distension with hypotension. If there's abdominal distension with hypotension, better to go for laparotomy to see. Positive diagnostic test for any injury requiring operative repair. So when you are in doubt, it's always good to go. Like I said, it is better to open and see than to wait and see. Now, laparotomy indications, again, the peritonitis, gross blood, bile or feces, pneumoperitoneum, pneumoretroperitoneum, evidence of diaphragmatic defect, gross blood from stomach or rectum, abdominal distension with hypotension, and positive diagnostic test for an injury requiring operative repair. So if you feel that the operation is anywhere required, go for laparotomy. Non-operative injury management. General considerations, criteria for non-operative management. Now, before going to that, let me assure you that it is a much more responsible way than opening and seeing, because you might be held responsible if something happens. Then they say, why you didn't go for surgery? So you only very mature and experienced surgeons should go for non-operative injury. The criteria for non-operative management is patient is hemodynamically stable after initial resuscitation. Continuous patient monitoring for 48 hours. Surgical team should be immediately available. You should not go around rushing for the team if things go bad. They should be available there. An adequate ICU support and transfusion facilities should be available. There should be no peritonitis and the sensorium should be normal. So all these you should consider non-operative treatment. If he is hemodynamically stable, if the patient is being monitored for 48 hours, if the OT facility and surgical team is immediately available, adequate ICU support and transfusion facilities are available, the peritonitis and is not there, and normal sensorium is there. Angioembolization may be alternative to surgical intervention, and all patients with solid organ injury managed non-operatively require admission for observation, serial hematocrit measurement, and repeat imaging. Like they say, all surgeons know how to operate. Most surgeons know when to operate, but very few surgeons know when not to operate. So you should know when not to operate, and if there's any doubt, it's always better to open and see. Now the patient is hemodynamically stable. If there's peritonitis, you go for laparotomy. If there's no peritonitis, you go for FAST. If he is not hemodynamically stable, go for FAST. And if it is equivocal, go for DPA. If DPA is positive, go for laparotomy. If peritonitis is not there but FAST is positive, non-operative management or patient with cirrhosis. If yes, go for abdominal CT, no, go for laparotomy. Indication for CT: altered mental status, confounding injury, gross hematuria, pelvic fracture, abdominal tenderness, and unexplained HCT below 35. Repeat FAST after 30 minutes. Now this is the management protocol again. Like I said, in ultrasound, blunt injury abdomen unstable, resuscitation 20 ml per kg, normal saline if it's stable. If it's not stable, resuscitation, again stable, no, again resuscitation, immediate laparotomy. This is the management protocol. Now the complications of abdominal injury include the hematoma rupture. The hematoma might rupture. The intra-abdominal abscess might occur later. Bowel obstruction or ileus, biliary leakage and or biloma, abdominal compartment syndrome and abscess, bowel obstruction, abdominal compartment syndrome, delayed incisional hernia can also be a complication of treatment. So all of these are a consequence of abdominal injury. First is hematoma, which might rupture later on, giving rise to an emergency. Then the intra-abdominal abscess might form, the bowel obstruction or ileus later on due to adhesions, biliary leakage and or biloma, abdominal compartment syndrome, and abscesses might form, bowel obstruction, abdominal compartment syndrome, and delayed incisional hernia can also be complication of management. Now, intentionally, I have not included the finer points of abdominal trauma, like how to deal with the ruptured spleen or rupture of the gut or the rupture of the liver. I have not dealt with that because this class is meant for graduates or general, not for surgeons. So I've kept that out of it. So these are the complications which might occur, and these are the references: Fitzgerald, Jensen, Eraiku. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Atul, for the wonderful presentation covering almost all the aspects of how to manage a case of blunt injury abdomen. The topic is now open for discussion. Any questions from the audience, you are free to ask. And we have our surgeons, Dr. Qasim. Sir, can you please add few points to the discussion? Any questions from the audience?
Dr. Nima, I am Dr. Abbas speaking.
Yes, doctor. Okay. Please, sir.
Yeah, I think Dr. Qasim may be busy because this time when we are rushing for our duties, So we are on the
Okay,
way.
fine. Thank you, doctor. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Actually, Dr. Atul has covered everything very well, and there is nothing left now which we can add. And it has been a very good presentation, and everything has been covered very nicely so that surgeons and non-surgeons, everybody can understand what he was saying. And there is nothing to add now. The only thing I would want to say for the general other doctors, apart from the general surgery department, which also Dr. Atul has already covered. The most important point in blunt trauma is that blunt trauma knows no boundaries. Actually, any outside injury, any uh, ecchymosis or any sort of external injury should not be misguide that a particular organ has been injured. Blunt injury knows no boundaries. There may be an outside injury in the right hypochondrium, but the bladder might be ruptured. Why? Because blunt trauma has a large area to cover. And in all abdominal blunt trauma, it is very essential that an X-ray and a chest examination is done, because associated chest injuries in blunt trauma abdomen are very common. So this is all that I want to say, that blunt trauma covers a large area, and outside injury should not be misguiding factor to find out that a particular organ may be injured. So the whole of the abdomen should be screened and the chest should not be missed. Thank you so much.
thank you, Dr. Abbas, for the points. As sir has aptly told, a systematic and methodic examination is very essential. We shouldn't miss out anything. Any more questions from the audience? If no more questions, we can conclude the session. The post test as well as evaluation are posted in the chat box as well as in AHS WhatsApp group. Please fill up the post test and evaluation before concluding the session. And thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Atul, for the wonderful presentation. So see you all for the next Sunday CME. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam, for your kind words, and thank you so much, Dr. Abbas, for your observations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Atul. Thank you so much.